Hey guys, welcome to the Bill Barnwell Show. I am Bill Barnwell. We are here on Tuesday morning for our Monday Night Football recap show, which you can listen to in your favorite podcast feed, or you can watch on YouTube, which if you're doing right now, you're seeing the face of a wonderful guest, a regular contributor to the show, one of my favorites from CBS, here to talk about the Cowboys stomping, smoking, your favorite S-ing verb, whatever verb you want to use for the Cowboys dominating the Raiders in this game, it probably fits. Joining me to talk about all that is CBS's JP Acosta. JP, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm feeling a lot better than all the Raiders fans that dressed up in the high shoulder pads and the spikes and painted their face just to see that game. But I'm doing really well.
Just loving the idea of them like walking back to the Las Vegas Strip to like get their cars, kind of bummed. I mean, I feel bad. Like, I want the Raiders to be good. I did say they were going to be better than they were last year this year, which we're not off to a great start, JP. We're in trouble with that one. It's been a rough few decades for the Las Vegas Raiders, and I guess we could start there. Obviously, we'll talk about the Cowboys plenty as well here. They were the dominant team in this game. Felt like, frankly, the home team as well for a chunk of this game. There were a lot of Cowboys fans in Las Vegas, which should probably be no surprise. But the Raiders get blown out in this game a week after they lose in more frustrating fashion, I would say, to the Denver Broncos, a game that they were competitive in. Frankly, could have won given how well their defense played. You heard Troy and Joe on this broadcast talking about how, you know, Pete Carroll, Patrick Graham, they felt like their defense was kind of taking a step forward. And then intrigued to hear why you think this might have been, but it just felt like they had no answers for the Cowboys in this game. They scored 33, frankly should have been 40 if not for a hilarious drop from CeeDee Lamb. What do you think was missing from the Raiders defense in this game? Why could the Cowboys do whatever they wanted on the offensive side of the football?
I think when you see the Raiders play well, it starts up front. And going into the season, I kind of felt like this defense had to be front four predicated. You had to get superstar games from Max Crosby. You had to get some more steps forward by Tyree Wilson. Malcolm Kuntz had to come back 100%. Their linebacker group which is one of the worst groups in the league. We're going to get to that. But their front seven had to be the anchor of this team because their secondary just doesn't have the dudes. They haven't had the dudes for a long time. And it feels like that sort of played out today or tonight. It felt like the Cowboys could have ran whatever passing concept they wanted and it would be open. And there were certain points where, you know, Kai Blue Kelly was unfortunately on the other side of all the George Pickens highlights because that's who they have to have out there. They don't have anybody else left on that roster. You know, when you hemorrhage all of those players like Nate Hobbs, who is now a Packer, Jacorian Bennett is now a Eagle. Like when you lose all those quality starters, somebody's got to play. And it feels like their development hasn't been good enough on either side of the ball, but especially in that secondary.
Yeah, and that's supposed to be Pete Carroll's thing. Like, Pete Carroll's been known for such a long time as the dude who's going to develop defensive backs. And so heading into the season, it kind of felt like that would be, at least by the middle or towards the end of the year, positive. You know, you think you're going to land on a mid-round pick who's going to be a difference maker. And Eric Stokes has been, you know, for a guy's a former first-round pick who had missed a lot of time in Green Bay, has been overall okay. But, I mean, even in this game, Darnay Holmes played 2 snaps. It was a lot of Lonnie Johnson in the secondary at safety. Like you said, Q.B. Kelly, who's been out of the lineup at times, was back in. It doesn't feel like they're really closer to answers in the secondary. And then, to your point, just did not have the horses up front. Max Crosby did get a strip sack on Dak Prescott early in this game. But, I mean, the Cowboys just marched up and down the field over and over and over again. And it wasn't even that, like, you know, be one thing if their cornerbacks were getting mossed. They'd be like, okay, well, like, just they have dudes and you don't have dudes. That's what happens. But how many times were there in this game where you would see, like, it'd be 3rd and 10 and it'd be like George Pickens on a slant with like 4 yards of separation on all sides, and they're just like, how could it be this? Like, this dude is already torching you, and I understand wanting to like give him a cushion, but Like, this is pitch and catch. It looks like practice out there for the Cowboys.
That's sort of, and to touch a little bit on the Cowboys, that's sort of what their whole offensive problem they want to ask defenses to answer is. If you want to shade coverage to CeeDee Lamb and leave George Pickens one-on-one, he can do that. And if you want to cloud coverage towards George Pickens, CeeDee Lamb can win his isolated matchups. And this is an especially bad issue for the Raiders, who, like we said, just don't have enough bodies in that secondary, and they don't have the linebacker groups or the linebacker types to really help in coverage. I mean, I hadn't heard Jamin Davis's name in ages, and Jamin Davis was out there getting important snaps for the Raiders defense. So it feels like this entire team, they're still feeling the effects of all the poor drafting, but the draft class that they just brought in, and the guy that I really wanted to highlight in this was Darian Porter, who was cornerback from Iowa State, didn't really play a lot of true cornerback snaps, but fits the body type, the physicality that Pete Carroll wants in his secondary. He hasn't really played often. He hasn't really grown into a quality starter for them. And of course, it might take a little bit of time, but that's a guy who didn't play a lot of corner coming out of Iowa State. He was a fifth-year senior who didn't play a lot of true corner snaps. It was a big risk to take him when they did, which is on day 2 of the draft. And you just go down the line of all of their draft picks this season, and you can't really find a lot of guys who are quality caliber players outside of Ashton Junty, who is sort of being fed to the wolves behind an offensive line that looks like the worst coach unit in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, the Raiders' offense is a mess, and we saw plenty of that in this game. But to your point, I mean, it's not just Darian Porter who played 15 snaps in this game. Second-round pick Jack Besh has been buried on not exactly overwhelming wide receiver depth chart. Caleb Rogers has not played a snap so far this year. Charles Grant has not been a regular part of the offensive line, which you mentioned has been really abysmal. I mean, those are your top 100 picks. Like, those are the guys where at the end of the day, you're sort of hoping, okay, if there's any positives to come out of this year, we have some building blocks. And we're not even seeing those guys play, which for Pete Carroll, who famously his thing is, I am all set. I am hyper focused on competition. I will not have my rookie sit. If you can play, you're going to be on the field. That seems really worrisome for this core of players, because I think it tells us that they don't think these guys, outside of Genty obviously, are even good enough to play versus the relative mediocrity we're seeing on the field for the Raiders right now.
Yeah, and I think, again, with Charles Grant, he was one of my favorite players entering this draft class, but it was also at the cost of he barely was over 300 pounds and played at William & Mary. Like, he was going to take time to develop. But Caleb Rogers was a guy who I thought could have played on day 1, and especially on the interior of the offensive line, where they're sort of sorting around, like Alex Kappa, Jordan Meredith, they're rotating guys in at guard and center. It just feels like their draft process was flawed this year in terms of who they brought in to contribute right away, or they're just not getting the development that they need to in this franchise. And that feels like an even bigger problem for Pete Carroll, because that was supposed to be your thing. You're supposed to be the developer of talent. We knew this wasn't going to be they're not going to win a lot of games in the AFC West. We thought they could be a sneaky fun team, but we didn't expect them to be like this monster team going into the season. You had to get the young guys going. But the floor has bottomed out in a way that I don't think anybody expected.
No, I mean, this is worse than Antonio Pierce last year. This is worse than Josh McDaniels, the year Josh McDaniels was there. And I have my issues with those moves and some of the moves that were made throughout that process, some of the rosters that were being built. This is at least a young team. It's not a good team, but it's a young team. But it has to be disheartening to see that. And I know myself, one of the things I saw was, okay, the floor is going to be higher because you have a competent coach. You're going to have a competent quarterback. And I do think some of the issues with Geno are just a product of having an offensive line that's totally untrustable. Geno has a, frankly, logical urge to self-persevere to preserve himself, and playing behind that offensive line, that's not a healthy way to live. And so he is on the move a lot. The ball's coming out quick because he knows I don't want to get hit every single snap. And if I hold the ball, that's exactly what's going to happen. But one of the other pieces that I felt pretty confident was going to be okay was Chip Kelly. And I found this game plan so fascinating because last week, watching that Broncos game, they were so predictable on offense. Run the ball on first down, get nothing. Screen or some kind of draw something to try and take the pass rush out of it on second down, which wouldn't work, and then drop back on third down. Geno gets sacked or pressured and has to throw the ball away. They had 29 dropbacks against 3 runs in the first half of this game. I will say, not predictable. You got me there, Chip Kelly. And they did move the ball, but once they got in the red zone or near the red zone or on the Cowboy side of the field, things typically fizzled out because of a sack or a penalty or sloppy play, a couple drops. So I guess what I want to ask is, can you make sense of what this game plan was for the Las Vegas Raiders? And do you feel like there's any sort of handle from Chip Kelly and from this coaching staff on what the Raiders would need to do on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, it felt like this offensive game plan was Chip Kelly telling everybody that he is scared of his offensive line. He's scared of them torpedoing the entire game plan. And when you look at how run heavy they have been, especially on early downs, the fact that they can't get anything going on the ground, that's sort of what Chip Kelly was supposed to bring to Las Vegas. Like, of course, everybody wanted to look at the passing game stuff at Ohio State, but it was the run game that was really stood out at Ohio State. You can draw up anything for Jeremiah Smith and he'll go and make a great play, but getting that run game going was why he was hired by Pete Carroll. And the fact that that hasn't worked out, it's sort of a signal that, like, look, man, like, it's easy to draw stuff up when you have all the talent on your side of the ball. And then when you get to a point where you don't have that immediate talent advantage, it feels like Chip Kelly is realizing the hard way that he doesn't have the talent advantage on the offensive line. They can't 5 out a lot. They ran a lot of play action in that first half and just kept Ian Thomas, kept Michael Mayer in for pass protection, and that's how their explosive plays happened. They just kept extra bodies in to throw the ball because they were scared of that offensive line. But like you said, when you get to the red zone and everything starts to confine, you have to figure out a way to get some sustainability on the ground, and it felt like Chip Kelly was just terrified of letting his run game torpedo itself.
Yeah, this was really like like the kind of game plan you would see for a quarterback in one of his first few NFL starts. Like, it was a ton of boot. It was a bunch of nakeds. It was, let's move the launch point. Let's get him out from under center because he's going to do something terrible. And I don't think that's how Chip feels about Geno Smith. I think that's how Chip feels about his drop back pass game as well. And so it was like kind of like flipping the downs a bit. Let's throw on early downs. Let's run on, they ran on like a 4th and short pitch for a first down. Like, let's only run if we need to. Just a weird one. And I do think you're right in that it's a recognition of how subpar the offensive line is, but it just sort of hits that sort of question I know I think a lot of people had early in the draft process when there were all those rumors about the Raiders drafting Ashton Jeanty, and it was like, well, I don't have an issue with them taking a great running back. Like, he's an awesome player, but do they have the infrastructure? Do they have the pieces? Do they have the things that are going to get the most out of Ashton Jeanty? Or is it just going to be sort of like, oh, he's going to figure it out. Oh, he's going to be special. He's going to make magic happen. Kind of feels like the Raiders were expecting the latter, and it's not really a slight or a fault or anything to do with Ashton Jeanty, just the reality of, like, nobody can transcend this offense. Nobody can be like a piece that is going to make 4 guys miss, every single series. Like unless you're Barry Sanders, and Ashton Jeanty is a good player, I don't think he's Barry Sanders. Like, you can't succeed in this offense. And so I do understand Chip moving away from the run, but this did feel a little on the extreme side.
Yeah, it felt super extreme. And going back to the offseason discussion about this run game and Ashton Jeanty being brought in, along with a lot of people, but especially myself, I actually thought that the Raiders' offensive line in terms of talent wasn't that far off from just being a competent unit running the football. But it feels like this group has just completely fallen apart. You've had Jackson Powers-Johnson going from guard to center to out of the lineup. You've had Colton Miller, who was still trying to get back from injury, and it just hasn't looked good for him. And then every other starter, like, it felt like they kind of nickel and dime the offensive line, which you can't really do if you bring in a good running back like this. You can't do if you have a quarterback in Geno Smith who, admittedly, like, his pressure to sack numbers have been really good in previous years, but now that he's 34 years old, that stuff is going to take a step back. So it felt like they thought way too highly. They thought higher of their offensive line than what their offensive line was actually showing this season. And it really has sort of tanked what their entire belief was going to be on offense. I mean, Chip Kelly likes running all the 5 out. He wants to get 5 out to the passing game. That requires every offensive lineman to win in one-on-one situations. And the Cowboys tonight rushed 5 or made them go one-on-one, and every offensive lineman lost. And that feels just like a really, really strong indictment on that offensive line and what they thought of them this season.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. The frustrating part is just, so many guys have taken a step backwards. Some of that's injury. Miller's been hurt. Powers-Johnson's hurt now. But even before the injury, I mean, they wouldn't play Jackson Powers-Johnson in his natural position. Like, they were kind of knocking him. He got benched earlier this year. This is a former second-round pick, and I know that the guys who drafted him are gone, but it's not like, again, there's tons of talent in front of them. Dylan Parham has taken a major step backwards. DJ Glaze looks like he's really overmatched at right tackle. These were young players, and you would sort of hope, okay, like, if we have a offensive coordinator who's going to put them in advantageous situations, if it's going to be, a lot of play action, a lot of stuff to, slow down the pass rush, make their lives easier. And if we can run the ball effectively, okay. Like if all these guys collectively take a step forward, we should be fine. But instead, you lose your left tackle, who's like the one veteran who's pretty good, and the young guys take a step backwards, and it just feels like there's nothing they can do. I mean, they can rotate guys in. Like I said, they could bring in Grant, they could bring in, their draft picks and see what they have, but it just feels completely broken. And if you're Geno Smith, I mean, how can you look forward to the rest of the season? Like, I feel like every week you're just like, oh, like, you're just looking at the other team's defense, and even if they're not that great, and the Cowboys are better today than they have been in recent weeks. We'll talk about them in a second. But, it just feels like, oh, like that Broncos game, Geno got the crap beat out of him in that game. And it just feels like this sort of like slow march to, his inevitable benching or him being released during the offseason. And I again, like, I don't put a lot of that on Geno Smith. I don't put a lot of the run game struggles on Ashton Jeanty. I put it more on the organization for not doing more to solidify the infrastructure. And I find it so weird that John Spytek came from Tampa Bay, where the Bucs had a terrible run game until they invested a ton in their offensive line. They used a first-round pick in Graham Barden. They drafted Luke Goedeke. They signed Ben Bredesen. They have Tristan Wirfs move to left tackle, and he's a superstar. He's a former top 15 pick. Like, that's the way you do it. You build the offensive line, the same way the Eagles did, and then you get the running back, and then the running back looks awesome. It just felt like it was really appealing to just like the image of what they believed Ashton Jeanty could be, instead of actually looking at what teams are doing to make their running backs' lives easier and build a coherent running game around a really talented running back.
Yeah, it feels like they brought in Jeanty and was like, he's going to immediately lift the running game, but also didn't go in and go, we have to continue to develop these guys on the offensive line. That's what when I watch this Raiders offensive line, I just see guys that haven't really been developed. They haven't really been coached that well. It's coming down to like procedural stuff. It's coming down to that safety that happened in the game on the 1 yard line. DJ Glaze ends up blocking Maris Liufau, who's the end man on the line of scrimmage, and completely disregarding Donovan Ezeraku, who is the defensive lineman to the inside of him on an inside run. And it just feels like, why are you being taught that? What's the process?
And this is not a 1 week thing. Every week, I went and did a big piece on all the rookie running backs, and I watched every Ashton Jeanty snap. And this was 3 or 4 weeks ago now, so there's been a few snaps since then. But it's remarkable how many times you watch the Raiders run game, and you're just like, you're asking that player to get to that guy from that angle. Even if they get stuff right, it's still like, they're not going to do that. Like Jacoby Myers is not Puka Nacua. Like he's okay, but like he's not he's not going to get to that block. Dante Thornton's not going to get to that block. Maybe at Ohio State when you have those dudes at receiver and those dudes up front and you have a talent advantage pretty much everywhere, you can pull that off. But it just feels like, the advantageous angles, the leverage, all the stuff you hear about, oh, this is what great run games focus on. This is when you watch them on tape, you see, oh, like they have these advantageous angles. They have these abilities to get to things that are going to play to their strengths. You have the ability to get to stuff that, if you get presented with the front that's not great for your called run, you can check to something else. You can check to a different kind of run that's going to work. It doesn't feel like the Raiders have that. And the offense, like you said, has completely lost faith in the run game as a result. And you get a game plan like this where, Geno is throwing, he was on pace for like 60 dropbacks or close at halftime.
It feels like they have no identity. And for a team whose identity was supposed to be the ground game, that's why you draft Ashton Jeanty top 10 overall. That's why you bring in Chip Kelly. You want to build an identity through the run game. It feels like their identity is Brock Bowers, help us. That's the entire identity. And if Brock Bowers isn't on, then it feels like the entire team falls apart. And of course, you want to build this offense around a guy like Brock Bowers, who is truly incredible. But they don't really do a lot of stuff to help him. Like he gets no help in that offense. He's got to win every single time against double coverage, against cloud coverage. He's got to win in order for this offense to work. And it just feels like this offense, especially with Chip Kelly calling plays, it doesn't really, like you said, with the motion and the angles, and there's no calling card to the run game. It feels like every great offense has an idea behind their run game. What do they want to do? How do they want to attack defenses?
For sure.
The Raiders don't have that. They just go out and do plays and hope they work.
I'm unfortunately, JP, thinking of what Brock Bowers did to Foyesade Oluokun in the Jaguars game a couple of weeks ago. As that was a viable game plan. Pick on the slowest linebacker you can find and just let your freak just get open for big play after big play. But you're right. I mean, I think about what the Chiefs did with Travis Kelce for so many years, and even what they do now, and just like, okay, like you're using him in motion to create mismatches. You're getting the most out of your personnel groupings to get him one-on-one. You're putting him in stacks. You're putting him in bunches. You're isoing him and stacking the other side. Like there's so much care put into that game plan for the Chiefs of, okay, like this is our dude. We have to do whatever we can to make his life easier, and then he's going to make everyone else's life easier. It doesn't feel like that with the Las Vegas Raiders. And this is a Cowboys team that, the defense was much better in this game, but you can throw on their linebackers. You can throw on their safeties. Like that. Like this was a great matchup for Brock Bowers. And he did have a few catches, didn't have a terrible game by any means, but just felt like when you are going to throw that much, it would have been nice to find more opportunities. And even go back to the Broncos game. I mean, the one big catch Brock Bowers has in that game is a play where Talanoa Hufanga jumps an underneath route. Like if Hufanga, who's obviously having an awesome year, like stays playing the deep half, Brock Bowers doesn't catch that football. He has one catch for like 8 yards in that game otherwise. So it just feels like this Raiders team is sort of a mess. And I guess the last question I have about the Raiders, the big picture then is like, I would assume Geno Smith is not going to be back as the starter in 2026. They've made change after change. They fired coaches. They fired GMs. They've changed quarterbacks. They've changed coordinators. Who's coming back next year? Like among that core of Pete and Chip and Geno, do you think any of them are going to be back in 2026?
I think the only person back is John Spytek, the general manager.
Wow.
With Pete Carroll is already 73 years old. He was supposed to raise the floor of this team. It's kind of like when you have like a substitute teacher who probably won't be the full time, but hey, we're gonna watch movies, we're gonna chill out. Nothing is going. The classroom isn't gonna burn down. The classroom is burned down in Las Vegas right now, and it feels like if Pete Carroll is not bringing the attention to detail on defense, if that hasn't shown up, then why is he still here? And then with Chip Kelly, he's just been a bust as an offensive coordinator. It just feels like he hasn't adjusted back to the NFL very well. So with all that being said, like, it feels like that nucleus, that trio of guys is probably not going to be here next season.
Yeah, I mean, I could see Geno as maybe a backup, as like the veteran behind whatever quarterback you're going to go with next year. I could see Pete maybe for another year. I can't imagine Chip coming back for a second season. This offense is broken, and it's unfortunate because there is some super talented dudes at playmaker for the Las Vegas Raiders. Flipping it to the Cowboys, I mean, if you're Jerry Jones, man, you feel good about what just happened. You make the big trades for Quinnen Williams and Logan Wilson. You bring back a bunch of injured dudes in this game. Demarion Overshown comes back. You have just a dominant defensive performance. Your defensive line looks great. Quinnen Williams is a sack and a half. He tops his season total with the Jets in one game. You get a safety. The other team is so scared of your run defense you've been talking about all year that they don't even run the football. I mean, I guess I ask, like, how much of what you saw tonight when the Raiders had the ball was the Cowboys defense being good versus the Raiders offense being incompetent?
I think if we're talking about what's real, what's not in this situation, I think what's real is Quinnen Williams' impact on this defense. And you could tell that with Quinnen Williams on the field, they have their own force multiplier where you have to account for him in pass rush situations. The reason they wanted to get to all those they wanted the 5-0, they wanted the Raiders to 5-0 the protection, was so they can get Quinnen Williams one-on-ones. When you have a guy you can design pressures around, you can design a defense around. It's a lot like having a wide receiver one on offense. Like, you have a guy
or
you can draw,
or an edge rusher one.
Yeah, like you have a guy that you can get. You have a guy who can go get you a bucket as a pass rusher. Mm-hmm. And I think Quinnen Williams was able to do that. Of course, the Raiders' offensive line is not going to be the same type of offensive line they're going to face at all moving forward. Sure. But in terms of process and what they wanted to do defensively, I thought Quinnen Williams had a great game. And you could see everybody else impacted by that. You know, Kenny Clark had a great game. Donovan Ezeraku had some really nice plays. So everybody on the defensive line was lifted by this rising tide of Quinnen Williams. And then I actually think Logan Wilson had some pretty cool plays. There was they're running Tampa 2, and he's blanketing Trey Tucker, and Geno Smith ends up having to throw it back shoulder. And that's sort of what you have Logan Wilson for. He's the smart coverage guy. I think Overshawn has some nice plays in space. So now they have specialists at linebacker now, instead of, Kenneth Murray and Shamar James sort of just running around. And even though Kenneth Murray had the interception was the best play I think Kenneth Murray has ever made. But you now have guys who can sort of make everybody else thrive in more specialized roles.
Yeah, I mean, Kenneth Murray and Shamar James were basically every down players for them earlier this year. They played about 45% of the snaps in this game each. Yeah, I mean, two things can be true. The Cowboys trading a first and a second round pick for Quinnen Williams, I don't think that was a good idea. Quinnen Williams is a good football player. He's not Micah Parsons, but he is really good, and he's going to make a difference right now. And this team, you talked about having a calling card for the Raiders offense. This team does have a calling card now on the defensive side of the football. They have a really deep and really impressive interior defensive front with Osa Odigizua, with Kenny Clark, with Quinnen Williams. I mean, we saw Quinnen Williams line up outside in a couple snaps. They can run all kinds of twists and stuff. You're going to get a one-on-one with a guard against one of those guys on every single snap, whether they're doubling Kenny Clark, whether they're doubling Odigizua, or whether they're most likely doubling Quinnen Williams, which, that's going to be a really advantageous opportunity. If you can get something from Ezeraku, if you can get something from Dante Fowler, if you can get something from Sam Williams on the edge, like, those guys are going to be the secondary, tertiary pieces. I would still rather have Micah Parsons be the primary piece, to be honest with you. When you talked about, but it just felt like when they traded Parsons, especially so close to the season, from Matt Eberflus's perspective, I was just like, well, okay, you've built all your pass rush packages, you've built all your designs on this idea that we have someone who can dictate what the pass protection is going to be. We have someone who, like, every time he's on the field, you're going to slide his way, you're going to double his way, you're going to chip, you're going to do all these different things to say, okay, we can base all our other one-on-ones, all our other, defensive fronts on what is someone going to do with Micah Parsons. And you do have that now with Quinnen Williams. I think other teams with remotely competent offensive lines will have more success dealing with that stuff. But you saw the impact of what that can look like when things are going well in this game. The Cowboys got to play from ahead. The other team has dudes who are probably not going to have long NFL careers on the interior. And the Cowboys have legit guys, at defensive tackle. They have legit athletes, legit playmakers, and everything just felt like a step or two better. And the weak spots in the lineup felt better. The cornerbacks had one of their best games of the year. The secondary looked fine. It really felt like if you were Jerry Jones watching this game, you were like, well, don't know why I got any criticism. I nailed it. It took a few weeks. Hey, listen, we had some trouble. I had to go get some natural gas or whatever, but we got it figured out. We're going to be just fine on the defensive side of the football.
There was a point in the game where I think it was after Quinnen Williams' first sack, and they cut to the press box, and Jerry Jones up there laughing. And I feel like that was just the entire, like, you could sum up the Cowboys defense with that image, because Jerry Jones, of course, like, you make the trade away Micah Parsons. And like you said, it felt like Matt Eberflus was like, well, what do I do now? Like, I designed everything around this one guy who can dictate pressures, dictate protections. And now I don't have that guy. So we just got to go out there and hope. And adding Quinnen Williams, and one of the things I was really curious about was how they're going to play all three defensive tackles together, because not only are they all three defensive tackles, they're all three highly paid defensive tackles. So how are you going to get all those guys on the field at the same time? And they were able to do it pretty well. I think they rotated those guys a lot, and I think that helps keep Quinnen Williams fresh. It keeps Kenny Clark fresh, and it actually takes Osa off the field in run situations where you can kind of save some hits on his body. But when you get all those guys out there, you get Ezeraku out there as well, you're forcing teams to really have to account for everybody on that defensive line. And the secondary looks better because it comes down to that age-old question of, does the pass rush affect the secondary, or does the secondary affect the pass rush? The answer is sort of both, but for the Cowboys, they're choosing, if we can force teams to get the ball out quick, we can force them into a mistake. And it felt like that sort of played out today, where they were forcing Geno Smith into mistakes, forcing him into sacks, and then that interception was one where they forced him to be more aggressive than he thought he had to be. Kenneth Murray gets up, tips the ball, and it ends in an interception. So that's going to be their game plan. They have to win with 4. They don't really blitz a lot. Like, that was never Matt Eberflus's game plan. But now that you can win with 4 and you have guys who you can dictate protections around, we'll see what happens. I mean, they have the dudes to play complementary football with their offense.
I mean, Matt Eberflus, going back to his time with the Colts, the other thing he said is, like, I need that 3 technique. Like, I need that guy who is going to be my penetrating tackle. They traded the first-round pick for DeForest Buckner to be that guy in Indy. Never really had that guy in Chicago, and they had like a good, half of his season on defense, but they were pretty bad otherwise. He has maybe 2 of those guys now. Like, Odigizua can be that guy maybe when he's playing well. Quinnen Williams can be that guy. I don't think it's a finished product. We'll see. They get to play the Eagles, the Chiefs, and the Lions over the next 3 weeks. So, like, we're going to get to see how much of a improvement they've made. But they're certainly better. And there's certainly some semblance of an infrastructure here to build upon. And in the offense in this game, Dak could do whatever he wanted. I mean, there was a couple plays where he got a little lucky without, dropped interception on a bomb to Pickens. But we talked about this earlier, just how easy it was for the Cowboys throwing the football in this game. The question I'd have for you, JP, and this is going to be a really fascinating to me. I don't know, maybe there's an obvious answer. But the big question for the Dallas Cowboys is, what do you do with George Pickens after this season? Because George Pickens is playing out of his mind. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens were both suspended for the first drive of this game, or benched for the first drive of this game. As we record this, I don't believe the details on why they were benched has come out yet. Maybe it'll be out by the time you guys listen to this tomorrow morning. So we're recording this Monday evening. But didn't matter. I mean, once they got back in the game, George Pickens was awesome. CeeDee Lamb was really good outside of that weird drop. This offense works. Like, this combination is really good. And yet, I would be a little scared about signing George Pickens to a massive extension. I would be, it sort of gets back to the same problem the Bengals are having, where it's like, do we pay 2 wide receivers $30+ million a year and our quarterback, market value deal? Do we go into a multi-year deal with George Pickens, who the Steelers clearly did not want to do that deal with? Is he fine? I mean, they're going to see stuff behind the scenes that we don't see, but what do you think they should do, and what do you think they will do with George Pickens?
I'm really fascinated by what happens with George Pickens in the offseason, because the biggest thing is, do you pay him like a borderline wide receiver one? Like,
right.
If we go and look at the similar guys in his range of top tier wide receiver twos, are you paying him the same amount that the Bengals paid T. Higgins? Are you going to pay him around that same range? So if you want to pay him that number and you feel like he can continue to be a consistent weapon in this offense, I think George Pickens has blossomed into a truly dynamic threat, where in Pittsburgh, he was sort of a specialist of, he's running go routes, he's running slants. Those are the only 2 things that he does well, and he's really good at those. But his play on in-breaking routes this season has grown so much. His ability after the catch has really been highlighted. I went and looked it up during the game, but George Pickens' yards per route run on in-breaking routes this season is a career high. He's averaging 2.6 yards per route run on in-breaking routes. That's the most he's ever had. And it feels like, with a full repertoire of routes to run, with a quarterback that can get him the ball, he has grown into such a dynamic player at the position. But I also kind of wonder if the Cowboys get priced out. Like, if somebody comes through and offers George Pickens, I don't know, if they offer him $30 million a year to go be like their legit wide receiver one, I don't think Dallas can do that, because Quinnen Williams is going to want an extension. You still paying Dak Prescott top of the line money. You're paying CeeDee Lamb top of the line money. I don't know if they'll be able to sign George Pickens back. So I think, in a roundabout way to answer your question, I think they're going to try to re-sign him, but I don't know if they're going to have enough.
Would you franchise him? Franchise tag is $28 million for next year.
Oh, honestly, with where the Cowboys are and what they want to do, I would franchise tag him, because with Dak being the age that he is, with this offense continuing to grow, and that you have a legitimate you have a guy you can build a defense around. I'm not saying this team can win a Super Bowl, but I'm saying that with how much Dak is making and his age, you got to go try and make a run for it now, because you can't sit here and say like, oh, we're still building. Oh, we're going to try and just be competitive in a rebuild with Dak Prescott making $60 million a year. So if you're going to try and actually go do the thing, you got to keep everybody around.
Yeah, I mean, $28 million for next year on the franchise tag, and then doing the math in my head, about 33 or 34 the following year. Maybe you take that to him and say, okay, like, we're going to give you 2 guaranteed years, 2 franchise tags at 62, so $31 million a year. Maybe you try to get a deal done there and say, okay, like, you can sign this deal, or we can franchise you twice. Like, we did it with Dak. Like, we'll do it with you. I think that's a plausible way to approach that, maybe. I mean, it's such a difficult situation, because you do have an offensive line that's really cheap with so many first-round picks. You're going to have guys get more expensive here in the next year or two. You're not spending a lot at running back. You did just sign Jake Ferguson, and the defense, you're probably moving on from Trevon Diggs. You're not going to be spending a ton at linebacker. I mean, it just sort of like, it's such a good fit. Like, it's just such a perfect combination of talents. I did, by the way, look up, and Marty Schottenheimer, no longer with us. Brian Schottenheimer said there were some things that were missed. It was his quote about CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, which, I mean, doesn't. it answers the question and doesn't answer the question at the same time. Are you like are you fully past the idea of like George Pickens being a dangerous thing to invest in, which I think was like the perception of him leaving the Steelers, this idea of like, oh, like if the Steelers don't want to keep him, that's proof that he's like bad news for your organization?
I think it's tough because I think with George Pickens, it's clear that he wants to win football games. Like we remember
Yeah.
the first game of the season where he's kind of just walking on routes and just choosing not to block. But when they're winning games and when he's fully locked in, he is truly a dynamic threat, like I said. So I sort of believe it, but I'm also sort of like, if you just keep throwing him the ball, like you can quiet a whole lot of stuff if he just keeps getting the ball, and they keep feeding him the ball, and obviously like nothing has really shown up. It's sort of just it's sort of like back in like WWF when you had like the APA, and you give them like a beer, and they're cool. They just play beer, they drink beer, they play cards. That feels like George Pickens. Like you feed them targets and it's cool. But as soon as the beer dries up, as soon as George Pickens stops getting targets, then somebody's getting the clothesline from hell.
Just picturing like a random like, you know, low rent card table on the Cowboys sideline and George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb just, you know, playing spades during the first drive of the game. Oh man. Incredible comparison. Who would have thought this podcast would compare the 2-star Dallas Cowboys receivers to the Acolyte Protection Agency here in 2025? That's what you'd get JP Acosta on the show for. What a weird team. I mean, you know, a mess of a year. Felt like almost a lost season in some ways after the Micah Parsons trade. They sit here now. I'm going to get the standings out here in front of me from the official NFL site if it loads for me. Cowboys now 4-5-1. They are the 10th seed currently in the NFC. Right now the Lions and the Panthers just ahead of them as the first two teams out. I did mention the schedule is about to get extremely difficult. The Eagles, the Chiefs, the Lions over the next 3 weeks for the Cowboys. JP, do you believe, with Quinnen Williams in the fold, with Dak and Pickens playing as well as they are, do you think the Cowboys can pull an upset or two and actually be a real part of the playoff picture here down the stretch in the NFC?
I'm going to hold off a little bit on like them like being legitimately in the playoff picture because like we said, it's great. The process looks good on both sides of the ball. I would like to see them play a team that actually like wants to be there instead of the Raiders. We're going to get a really good look at what this team is going to be, like you said, over the next 3 games. The Eagles won't have Lane Johnson, might not have Cam Jurgens. If you can grimy that game up enough, and we saw it in week 1, if you can make that game into a rock fight, Dak Prescott's going to find something. And with Dak, CD, George Pickens, they're going to find something. So who knows what happens there. The Chiefs are kind of a mess. So we don't know what's going to happen there. And then, you know, the Lions have their own issues up front. So if their defense, if Quinnen Williams is the force multiplier that we all believe him to be and what the Cowboys are going to pay him and what they traded in terms of capital for him to be, you can take out at least one of those. You can make that game. You can make one of those games real tough. But I don't know if I'm calling them legit playoff contenders yet.
I mean, think back to the Amari Cooper trade a few years ago when they traded the first-round pick for Amari Cooper in midseason with these Raiders, ironically enough, and it was a thing that really propelled their offense forward. They ended up making the playoffs that year, which they were not in position to do when they made that trade. Amari Cooper really pushed them into a playoff run, and so could Quinnen Williams be that guy? We will see here in the weeks to come. But like you said, some more serious competition. We'll get a lot more information about where the Cowboys sit after the next 3 weeks of football. JP, I don't think anything could be a better advertisement for the range of skills, knowledge, and insight you have than the APA George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb comparison. If that interests people, and to be clear, if you're listening to the show, it should interest you. That is incredible. Where can people check out your work?
You can find me at Pushing the Pile podcast over at CBS Sports. Sunday nights, Tuesdays, Thursdays, I have a segment, JP's Playbook, every Tuesday. We go over my favorite plays of the last week of football. We might have some defense. We might have some running the football. We're going to have some special teams. We'll get into that as well. You can find me at CBS Sports. I write at CBS Sports. And then CBS Sports HQ, CBS Sports Network. You can hear me talking. So anywhere where there's football, basically, you'll find me there.
JP, thank you so much.
Thank you.